When you hear the word settlers in the context of the West Bank, what do you imagine? For most people, the answer is probably a certain type of radical, idealistic pioneer living in a small, undeveloped town. But the settlers aren't a monolithic group. There are settlers from various backgrounds with a range of ideals. So where did the settlers come from? What motivated them then and now? And how did they create a movement that would forever alter Israel's landscape? A quick recap. At the end of Israel's 1948 War of Independence, the West Bank, or what the Jewish people have historically called Judea and Samaria, was in Jordanian hands. But in the Six-Day War of 1967, there was a complete reversal. Israel gained all that land and more. Ultimately, Jews' desire to cement this reunification by returning to live in the West Bank led to the settler movement. Zionism's pioneering essence had primarily been secular, and for decades, it had been led by the socialist labor Zionism movement. Now, though, there was a new frontier, one in the heart of the biblical homeland, and a new group of religious Zionist pioneers took the helm. From now on, the settler movement would be infused with and fueled by religious passion and a newfound Jewish pride of being able to liberate and live in much more of their ancient homeland. Under the guidance of their spiritual leader, Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, the religious settlers' mission took on an almost mythical quality. They wanted to play a role in the redemption of the Jewish people, bringing the Jewish story back full circle, back to where it started, with Jews living in the very heart of their ancestral homeland, deciding their own destiny. The first place they chose to resettle was Kfar Etzion in the Judean hills. 19 years earlier, in the War of 1948, the men of Kfar Etzion, about 130 in all, had been massacred by Arab paramilitary forces. Now, their children wanted to return home, literally. Hanan Porat, a 24-year-old, had been one of those children. As a young, charismatic leader of the new settlement movement, he got a meeting with Prime Minister Levi Eshkol a few weeks after the war and secured a vague permission to, quote, go up to Kfar Etzion for Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. Now, it's unclear what Eshkol was actually agreeing to, a temporary visit or a permanent settlement, but the end result was that the Jewish community of Kfar Etzion was reborn. Taking a page from the same book just a few months later, Rabbi Moshe Levinger, who later served prison time for anti-Arab activities, arrived at a hotel in Hebron with a group of 88 Jews. They hoped to celebrate Passover in the ancient town, whose Jewish population had been massacred in 1929. And when Passover was over, they refused to leave, leading to the Jewish resettlement of Hebron and the establishment of the Kiryat Arba community just outside of the town. Now, it's not that the Labor Party or the political left were all against settlements at that time. Although Prime Minister Rabin despised the religious settler movement, he even referred to it as a cancer, many secular Zionists saw the settlement of the greater land of Israel as a continuation of the original Zionist mission. In fact, Defense Minister Shimon Peres clashed with his rival Prime Minister Rabin and supported the movement. But as he later explained, the secular labor government's primary reason for its limited support of settlements was security. The West Bank and the Sinai served as essential buffers against Israel's enemies to the east and south. So during the first 10 years of the settlement movement, from 1967 to 1977, the labor government tolerated and sometimes even initiated settlements specifically along the eastern side of the West Bank and in the Jordan Valley. Now, in addition to their religious aspirations, the religious Zionists were also motivated by security and their conviction that Jews should be able to live freely in their ancient homeland. Many of them felt that the entire West Bank was vital for defense and not just the zone where the labor government supported settlements. By forming blocks or communities outside this zone, they hoped to both enhance security by their presence and make it difficult for the government to ever relinquish control of this land. In 1974, the religious Zionists formed a political entity called Gush Emunim, or Bloc of the Faithful. The group achieved its first major victory in 1975 when, led by Porat and Levinger, they converted the abandoned train station in the Samarian village of Sebastia into a makeshift settlement. The Supreme Court ruled the settlement illegal, and Prime Minister Rabin sent in the IDF to forcibly remove the settlers. But each time the IDF removed them, the settlers would just return. After watching this happen 7 times, Rabin's government caved and allowed 30 people to relocate nearby. Due to what you might call a deliberate misunderstanding by Porat and Levinger, 30 people became 30 families, and the town of Elon Moreh was born. Gush Emunim continued to create new settlements by organizing mass rallies, demonstrations, and even simply setting up camp on site, creating communities that the government and IDF would find difficult to uproot. By 1977, dozens of settlements housing thousands of settlers had been established with the permission or acquiescence of the labor government. But then, on May 17, 1977, everything changed. After decades of left-wing labor leadership, a political revolution occurred in which the Israeli public voted in the opposition right-wing Likkud Party under the leadership of Prime Minister Menachem Begin. While labor leadership had hesitantly supported the building of settlements, Begin actively encouraged and promoted it all over the West Bank. The day after his election, Begin visited the still temporary dwellings of Elon Moreh and announced, "Soon there will be many more Elon Morehs." Between 1977 and 1983, during Begin's time in office, the number of settlements doubled from about 75 to 150, from a population of about 3,000 to about 24,000 in the West Bank and Gaza. Now, almost every aspect of the settlements themselves differs from one to another. Any attempt to lump all the settlements together won't give you a real picture of what these settlements actually look like. Settlements are big and small, cities and outposts, metropolitan and remote, religious, secular, and mixed. And of course, legal and illegal, depending on who you ask. But we'll get to that in a minute. Israelis live in these towns and cities in Judea and Samaria for a variety of reasons. Some for idealistic reasons, some for religious reasons, and some because they feel they're contributing to Israel's security. Some, but not all of the idealistic settlers, are committed to the liberation of the entire land of Israel. They're definitely a minority, but are probably the loudest and have solid representation in Israel's government. As a result, when people think of settlers, they usually picture this minority. Other Israelis live in settlements for simple economic reasons, since real estate and the cost of living is more affordable there. Some ultra-Orthodox Jews live in settlements specifically zoned for ultra-Orthodox communities because, in addition to affordability, it gives them a level of seclusion that makes it easier to live their traditional lifestyle. Some Israelis live in settlements simply because that's where they grew up and they want to raise their children near their parents and family. Ultimately, Israelis live there because to them, it's home. Now, many settlements have been mainstreamed, so to speak, and most Israelis feel confident that in any peace deal, they will remain a part of Israel. These include the large established Gush Etzion bloc, which contains cities like Efrat and also smaller towns like Kfar Etzion. They also include large cities like Ma'ale Adumim, home to secular and religious Zionist Jews, and Beitar Illit, home to ultra-Orthodox Jews. The city of Ariel, the diversely populated capital of Samaria, and nearby Modi'in Illit, another ultra-Orthodox enclave. Many of these settlements are just over the Green Line, Israel's pre-1967 border, and act as suburbs of Jerusalem and other major Israeli cities. On the other hand, there are settlements that are on less secure footing, but are still considered legal by Israel. Some of them are important ideologically and symbolically to religious Jews, like the biblical towns of Beit El, Shiloh, Hebron, and Kiryat Arba. But because these settlements are small, with an average population of less than 7,000 residents, many, if not most, Israelis are willing to compromise on these settlements for the sake of peace. Generally, while the international community considers all settlements illegal, the Israeli government views these settlements we described, both mainstream ones and those you might call fringe, as legal according to both Israeli and international law. But we'll explain more on that in episode 5 of this series. Still, although it may sound like a lot, altogether, these settlements only amount to about 5% of the entire West Bank. And then, there are a few settlements that even Israel considers illegal. We'll get into the 1995 Oslo Accords in episode 5, but they were a set of agreements that basically divided the West Bank into 3 areas, A, B, and C. According to Israeli law, Area A, which is about 18% of the West Bank, is off limits for Israelis and is governed by the Palestinian Authority, or PA. And this is where about 90% of Palestinians live in places like Ramallah, Bethlehem, and Jericho. Another 22% is Area B, where the PA has administrative control, but Israel is responsible for maintaining security. In the other 60%, Area C, Israel has full control. Areas B and C contain both Jewish and Arab cities and villages, and Israel considers new settlements built without permits to be illegal. These are often referred to as outposts or hilltop settlements and are usually no more than a few ramshackle buildings and tents. The majority of settlers themselves also consider these outposts illegal and view these more extremist settlers as beyond the fold. But although these hilltop settlers attract a lot of attention, there are only about 2,000 families living in fringe settlements like these. In several cases, the Israeli government has called in the IDF to remove these outposts and demolish the homes. But getting back to how Israeli society as a whole views settlements overall. Even though there are varying perspectives on the motives, importance, and even legality of settlements, there is some consensus on what action to take right now. Anytime the Israeli government has discussed withdrawing from parts of the West Bank, it's generally been considered acceptable only as part of a concrete plan to end the conflict. In the meantime, the status quo continues, with Israel attempting to ensure its security by keeping the West Bank settlements as a sort of buffer zone. In other words, for now, Israel is focused on managing the conflict rather than solving it, despite the moral challenges it creates. No matter what your position, in order to really understand the settlement movement, it's important to understand where the settlers are coming from, their religious aspirations, historical claims, and security needs. And for there to be any hope for progress, it seems that the various Israeli perspectives should also be taken into consideration by the international community. Then on the flip side, are those who do empathize with the settler movement also able to empathize with the Palestinians? But that's a question for next episode. See you guys next week.